Boi Shalom, Ateret Bala, Nambarina, Eudasaula, Tokemune, Amsegula, Boi Shalom, Boi Shalom, Ateret Bala, Gambarina, Eudasaula, Tokemune, Amsegula, Boi Shalom, Boi, Tokemune, Amsegula, Boi, Kala, Tokemune, Amsegula, Boi, Kala. Shabbat Shalom. We sang another version of that song last night in synagogue. I do, and part of what we do is we do a lot of relations with other groups. Over the years, we've done things with other synagogues and organizations, and working with Holocaust survivors and different things like that. And those times are always very rewarding, very learn so much, establish relationships. So like here in town, I have a good relationship with Rabbi Libby, and he sends me stuff, and we have a good relationship. He reminds me of my late father-in-law, of blessed memory, and he's actually not from the area. He comes up every once in a while here to this area, but anyway, it's always wonderful to establish those relationships and broaden our horizons and learn from one another. So, and one of the things that we talked about last night was that, basing it on this week's parasha, was turning to righteousness. And I was thinking of what we were, it was as he was talking, I was thinking about how the sages say that just the act of someone saying, I really need to return to God's ways, or I need to turn to following God. At that instant, the sages say that person is a tzaddik. That person is a righteous person. They're considered righteous at that point. Then what they do with that from there and there on, that's where we go. That's where we learn. And that's part of what we do here with Hebrew Perspectives is you can go to congregations in places all over the world, and you can hear sermons, and you can hear people preach all kinds of things, but oftentimes many people walk away and they haven't learned anything. Maybe they've learned something, but they still don't know where to go, what to do. What do we do from here? Where do we go from here? And hopefully in what we do here, we help you. And that's in the description of the YouTube video. And it's also in the description on the event on the Facebook page. It's also on Hebrew Perspectives page. You can learn from that where that is. And so what we do. And so you can read about that. Welcome to Hebrew Perspectives, where you will get the Hebrew perspective. Why do we give you the Hebrew perspective? Because think about this. I want you to think about this. This is very logical. This is not hard to understand. We read a Jewish book. We follow Jewish heroes throughout all of this Bible. Hello, Catherine. Good to see you. Welcome to all. We follow a Jewish Messiah, and yet when words like Torah are spoken, people are like, oh, Torah simply means instruction. I'll say it and I'll say it again. And so it's a wonderful thing. It's just basics. Like and share these videos, please. Let's get this out. Let's grow. Let's spread the word, and let's welcome to those of you that are also. We've got some watchers in Africa and in India, Australia, and then throughout the United States and places like Minnesota, where Catherine's at, where it's probably snowing like it is here in Iowa. Well, it looks like it's calmed down a little bit. I looked out earlier. I couldn't even see out the window. There was so much snow coming down. We're having these little squalls of snow lately. But let's get to it. Let's get to it. We've got a lot about the life of Sarah. Sarah's Chayei Sarah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Please, Lord our God, sweeten the words of Torah in our mouth and in the mouth of your people, the family of Israel. May we and our offspring and the offspring of your people, the house of Israel, all of us, know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Lord, who teaches Torah to his people, Israel. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who selected us from all the peoples and gave us his Torah. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah. And like we always say, the blessing, and this blessing says, may this Torah study be sweet to you. Sweet to you. Yeah, I see that, Catherine. It's like it's like January weather out there right now, and it's just we're halfway through November. Well, a little more than past halfway, but we have, folks are thinking about Thanksgiving coming up. Here in America, we celebrate Thanksgiving that we found this wonderful country. Well, I say we. There's all kinds of history. It's funny how people want to change history all the time. Why do they want to do that? Oh, don't get me started on that. Don't get me started on that. Sarah's life. Sarah's life. We are in Genesis chapter 23. And we will kind of touch back here and there on some things that we missed from last week on the Akedah, on the binding of Isaac. We'll just touch on some things here and there. Why? Because they're relevant to what happens here in this portion of Sarah's life, which is actually a paradox. It's really about Sarah's death right here in the beginning. Hallelujah. So those of you that are sending me messages through you need to be here with us. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. So now you see we kind of have this paradox where we are talking about it's called the life of Sarah, but yet it's about the death of Sarah. And so it's a lot of this is, it's about death and about how we face it. It's really in a commentary on how we have life and how we live it. So in verse number 1, it says Sarah's lifetime was 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years, the years of Sarah's life. Now remember, for those of you that don't know, that you're new, these Torah portions broken up into 7 aliyah for each day, which we list for people to follow in daily study, because that's what the Messiah and his disciples did. It's what King David did. It's what Moses instituted. It's what Ezra and Nehemiah brought back for us to do. And so what we have here in this verse number 1 is Sarah's life, and these portions are named after the first few words or important words within the first line or lines of that portion. And that's why it's called Chayei Sarah, or Sarah's life, or the life of Sarah, if you want to say it that way. Now, Sarah was a very wonderful individual. They say that much of Judaism is based upon what Sarah did and how she lived life and how she died. Is that she lit candles on Friday night, and she baked the best challah in the world, and she created family purity in her home. And This is one of those. It's like one of those threefold chords. It's not easily broken, right? And this is how important she was. Considered a prophetess. Considered a prophetess. Yes. Now, in verse number 1, Rashi, who, for those of you who don't know, he's a commentator from like the 1300s in Europe, Jewish commentator, and he has much insights into a lot of what we read in the Torah. But he talks about how the years are repeated. It says, 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. And then it says the years of Sarah's life, saying the years, that's not given a number right there. So remember, everything in the Bible isn't just thrown out there willy-nilly. There's a reason why things are worded the way they are. And it's for us to dig, because we're always looking for insights. We're looking for insights into the Messiah and how to live and where to go and what to do. Again, that's what we do here. Now, so he points out that it's to indicate that they were all equally good. So how can we say that all of Sarah's years were equally good? When I think of life, and I think of balance, and I think of how Moses in I think it's the 91st Psalm. Yeah, some of the Psalms are by Moses. Most of them are by King David. And I've mentioned this before. But there's a Psalm, you don't quote me on it, but you can go and look it up for yourself, which is something I always encourage you to do. Don't just believe everything I say. Go look things up, study for yourself, grow with us. Now, so anyway, Moses, he talks about to God, he says, for every bad day, Lord, give me a good day. And it's a balance, because God is a God of weights and measures and balance. And we're living in this life where we're always trying to find balance. I think my wife and I, we sat down this morning and we read devotion with Rabbi Twersky, and talking about how to the extremes of left and right, whether it's whatever it is, eating, I can't think of anything right now, but the point is there's in the middle, and in the middle scares people. Living in the middle scares people, but there's a reason why you have to have balance in your life, because extremes throw everything off and put everything into chaos. So now, so how can we say this? So Sarah was told 2 different times, hey, don't say your wife, say you're my sister. Now, I know we didn't talk a whole lot about this, but in the past parasha, but we have to understand that again, people they're human. People make mistakes. They do things. Most times it's for self-preservation. You may find yourself in a situation where you may lie to preserve either your pride or your life. Or injury, whatever it may be, but it happens. But we get up and we do teshuvah and we return to God. And still, Abraham and Sarah were very important. So she was told to say you're my sister. That kind of put her into a Harry harem situation. That's tough, and then there's the whole, she heard repeated promises of having children. And she was many years of infertility. She was barren, let alone have just one child. She was told that she would have children. And then there's the whole Hagar mess, and that was Sarah's idea. And then what that did was bring strife. And so you have a lot of uncertainty that was happening. So how can we say things were equally good? Well, there is also Abraham's death in this parasha. If we skip ahead just to Genesis chapter 24 and verse number 1, it says, now Abraham was old, well on in years, and the Lord blessed Abraham with everything. Okay, think about this now. Blessed him with everything. 7 times before this, God promised him the land. God promised Abraham the land. And yet, Abraham didn't even own a burial plot. When we read through Genesis 23, we see that he goes through this whole process of basically having to humble himself with these people, saying, I'm a stranger in a strange land. I need a burial plot. You know, after this many years and wandering around in the land for this long, they didn't have any place that they had really rooted themselves to. They hadn't purchased anything, so to speak. Well, part of it is because it was being told he was going to inherit the land. And so he told them in verse number 4 of chapter 23, I'm an alien and a resident among you. And grant me a state for a burial site with you, that I may bury my dead from before me. So you see here now, we also have that he's a stranger, or strangers in a strange land, right? We oftentimes we can relate with Abraham. I get amongst people, or sometimes we say of like faith, but yet you can still feel like you're a stranger among them, because not everybody believes the same. There's just so much confusion today. And here we try to cut through the confusion. But for God to tell him in 24 in verse number 1, the Lord had blessed Abraham with everything. Everything? There seems to be kind of a little bit of a contradictory thing going on here, doesn't it? But then if we go a little bit further and we jump to chapter 25, the whole Bible is interesting how you can kind of jump around and you can connect points and bring things together. And so if you go to chapter 25 and you go to verse number 8 and you read, and Abraham expired and died at a good old age, mature, turn the page, and content, and he was gathered to his people. So another word of content is satisfied. So Abraham had everything, he lived a life, and he died. So you have both of them dying in this, but he actually doesn't die yet. He lives another 38 years from the point that this is talking about. But that's just the Bible. That's how things for you. You have to study these things out and look through these things to see them. So, and that's another reason why we kind of look into these extra things to help us understand. So could he really be satisfied? He was told he was going to be a father of a great nation, right? Remember that? He was told he was going to be, as I said, he was going to inherit the land, right? And so what we have here is he doesn't see a great nation, and he still has not inherited the land. So these are promises that he is not seeing fulfilled in his lifetime. So how can the Bible say that he was satisfied? Oftentimes we have promises that we feel like God has given us in our life, and we have not seen them come to fruition. We have not seen them fulfilled, but yet we can live a satisfied life. We can learn something from Abraham. So to understand death, we have to understand life. My wife, for a while, she went around and she was selling pre-need burial insurance. Boy, what a tough sales job that is. Nobody wants to talk about death. People would rather talk about life, but it's important. And there's a saying that says, if you have a why, you can bear the how. If you have a why, you can bear the how. Now, Abraham and Sarah, they had the ultimate why. They had the ultimate why. They were called to go. Go. They were called to go, and we've been called to go. They heard a divine voice that told them to go. We have heard the Messiah tell us, go, right? Where? Into the unknown, into a strange land, becomes strangers, setting aside security. So many folks, it's so easy to just sit back and not let their paradigm change. And I'm good. God calls us to go, and we are going to experience uncomfortable situations. We're going to experience these things. We're going to be a stranger. Rabbi Sachs says, Abraham, in talking of Abraham and Sarah, we have to have the faith to believe that by living by the standards, I'm emphasizing that word, of righteousness, emphasizing that again, and justice. You know what? Laws, adherence to laws, right? They would be taking the first step to establishing a nation, a land, a faith, and a way of life that would be a blessing to all humankind. Now, excuse me, forgive me. So, speaking of biblical narrative, Eric Auerbach, he said that the biblical narrative is fraught with background. And what he means by that is that much of the story, when we read of these stories, much of the story is unstated. This is why we look at Midrash. This is why I have so many books like these that kind of help fill in the holes. We speak of a group of folks, a group of people that have tons of years of tradition and things. And many people, just as a little side note, a lot of people have trouble with stuff like this. And to that, I would say that you have to understand that many things were transmitted orally. God gave oral commands to his people and to many heroes that we follow in the Bible. He gave them oral commands, and those commands weren't written down right away. And we see examples of this throughout history. And so that's why it's important to understand that these traditions were carried on orally and then eventually written down. I think I mentioned something about this last week about Abraham. It was counted to him for righteousness. He believed and it was counted for him to righteousness. But then later on, we read in Genesis chapter 26, which is in the next portion that we go to, and Toldot. And again, God gives the promise to Isaac, and he tells him why, because basically Abraham not only believed, but he followed his standards, his righteousness, his justice. And toward the end there it says, and his Torah tot, or his laws. What laws? Everything that he gave to him orally or physically, so to speak, like when they had covenant, when he walked between the pieces, he obeyed God's commands. And so he obeyed God's laws. And so that's why it's important when we talk about these things. And so that's why we bring up things out of the Midrash. They help fill the holes. I know a lot of people don't like to talk about this, but if you're a Star Wars fan, you watch the movies throughout the years. I remember when I was a kid, when we went to see Star Wars, it was like late 70s, showing you how old I am. All right. But then I noticed after that, when people wrote books to fill in the holes of what happened from this point to this point. And it's kind of a similar kind of thing. But here we have a tradition where we have people that actually lived this life. They lived it, and they lived to talk about it, and eventually it was written down. Now, so one of the things that when we read these is that we don't know how they felt. We don't know what was going on in their minds. We don't know what it was like for Abraham and Isaac to make that trek to Mount Moriah to, for the binding of Isaac. We don't know what was going through their minds. We have midrash that speculates, and they you look at the scripture and it says that Abraham got up early in the morning. Well, and there's discussion on that early in the morning. If if you didn't feel like you really wanted to go and take care of this, what God has commanded you to do, take your son, your only son, then you probably would be, a pro at procrastinating. Um, anyway, so we don't know what they were feeling. And we don't know what Sarah was going through when she was put into those harem situations. That's pretty harrowing. And and fraught with moral dilemma, for sure. And then so for the Bible to say that, for the Torah to say that of these two things, that he was blessed with everything, and that when he was old and satisfied, these are important statements for us to look at and to study and to understand. It's you basically having serenity in the face of death and tranquility in the face of life. Everything, good or bad, is part of the journey. And then in that process, God is giving us a strong heart, strengthening our heart, strengthening in faith, and we obey his commandments. We connect with God as much as possible, and our heart is strengthened. What does the Bible talk about? It talks about men's hearts fail them for fear. All right. So people allow anxiety. The bad comes in life and anxiety hits them. And anxiety does what? It affects the heart. And that is why heart disease is one of the biggest killers in America. I don't know about the rest of the world, but that's what it is. And so we have a strong heart. Now, like I said, we've done things over the years with other groups, with Stand With Us, and with Grassroots for Israel, and we've done things with Midwest Center for Holocaust Education, and so we have crossed paths with some wonderful people, Holocaust survivors. And sad to say, it is a dwindling thing that's happened, and it brings up, this Torah portion brings up conversations of martyrdom, so to speak. And one thing Rabbi Libby was telling me last night, and he was saying that people in the Holocaust, people that died, they consider them to, that was because of what they went through. That was like a free pass to heaven for them. And I thought it was interesting, and that's why I ended up talking about how someone turning to righteousness at that point, they're considered a tzaddik, making that step toward God. But there's a book, there's many books. Maybe you've read stuff by Viktor Frankl or Elie Wiesel. Some things some of it's hard to read because of some of the things that they did. Books by I've got some of them, but I can't think of it right now. But the one I want to talk about a little bit, there's a book by Edith Eger, and it's on her survival of Auschwitz and the Death March. And she wrote a book called The Choice. Very fitting because of what we've been talking about here. And she was one of 12,000 Jews, that was transported from Kois, Hungary, On the first day, her parents were murdered. On the first day. And there was a woman that was next to her and pointed to a smoking chimney and told her, "You better start speaking of your parents in the past tense." Now, along with her sister Magda, they both survived Auschwitz and they both survived the death march. And then, uh, we read a little bit further here. We talk about some things from her book. It says here, so when American soldiers eventually lifted her from a heap of bodies in an Austrian forest, she had typhoid fever, pneumonia, pleurisy. I don't even know what pleurisy is. I have to look that up. And a broken back. Wow. That's crazy. After a year, her body had healed and she married and became a mother. Healing of the mind took much longer and eventually became her vocation in the United States, where she went to live. Now, on their way to Auschwitz, Edith's mother said to her, "We don't know where we are going. We don't know what is going to happen, but nobody can take away from you what you put in your own mind." That sentence became Edith's survival mechanism. What her mother told her helped her to make it through. Initially, after the war, to help support the family, she worked in a factory, but eventually she went to university to study psychology and became a psychotherapist. She has used her own experiences of survival to help others survive life crises. Think about that. Take the tragedy that you had in life and turn it into something positive to help others. Is this or is this not the way God wants us to do things? So, early on in the book, she makes an immensely important distinction between victimization, in other words, what happens to you, and victimhood, how you respond to what happens to you. And so here's what she says in her book about the first thing, about victimization. She says, "We are all likely to be victimized in some way in the course of our lives. At some point, we will suffer some kind of affliction or calamity or abuse caused by circumstances or people or institutions over which we have little or no control. This is life, and this is victimization. It comes from the outside." Remember what her mother told her? We don't know where we're going. We don't know what is going to happen, but nobody can take away from what you put in your own mind. Oh, this is one of those things that you just hope people would learn and could have an understanding. Now, on the other part of it, victimhood, she proceeds to say in her book, she says, in contrast, victimhood comes from the inside. Ooh. No one can make you a victim but you. We become victims not because of what happens to us, but when we choose to hold on to our victimization, we develop a victim's mind, a way of thinking and being that is rigid, blaming, pessimistic, stuck in the past, unforgiving, punitive, and without healthy limits or boundaries. Wow, think about that. In the first part of it, we learn that this stuff comes from the outside. It's life. It's going to happen. But then if we don't control that and we don't turn it to a positive, listen to the list of things that she says. You become rigid. It affects your way of thinking. You blame others. You become pessimistic. You're always thinking, the worst of everything. And you get stuck in the past, unforgiving, punitive. You start judging and accusing others and without healthy limits or boundaries. We have to have boundaries in our lives, and those boundaries are of what we allow in, and we allow those things in to take residence in us, and they affect our life. So she was interviewed, and she said about this book, she was asked about this book and she was interviewed, and she says, "I've learned not to look for happiness because that is external. You were born with love and you were born with joy. That's inside. It's always there. Love and joy are always there. Love and joy are always there." So, another thing that Rabbi Sachs says, he says, "I believe that faith helps us to find the why that allows us to bear almost any how. The serenity of Sarah's and Abraham's death was eternal testimony to how they lived." Isn't that great? Isn't that wonderful? So let me find back where I am with my notes. Okay, so now many midrash, when I say midrash, again, remember this is commentary on the Torah. Many midrash explain Sarah's death. There's explanations as to how she died, because it just, in here it just says she died. And like I said, they're trying to fill the holes. Pardon me again. Maybe I should have sang a little bit longer in the beginning to clear this out. So again, looking back to the Yakidah, to the binding, you have Abraham coming back with the servants, but no Isaac. Okay. And so again, there's many things, and I think last year I taught you about how basically Isaac didn't come back because he stayed at Moriah, or not, he didn't stay at Moriah, but he went to Torah school with Shem, who was a distant relative, of course, who had a Torah school, learning God's, remember, instruction. Torah means instruction. Torah has been from the foundation of the world. There are evidences that that the folks here in the Bible, that they had understanding of what instructions, of what God's laws were. As a matter of fact, and even Rabbi Libby even pointed out that he said he's been reading for years and didn't notice this until just recently, just the other day as he was studying it, that Isaac was born on the 15th of Nisan. And the 15th of Nisan, and I think I pointed this out last week, the 15th of Nisan is the beginning of Passover. So so the rabbis, and so Rabbi Libby, he even said, and the rest of the sages, excuse me, think that Abraham had some knowledge of what a Pesach, what a Passover is. Remember, he's also the one that he basically passed over from Ur Chasdim to the Promised Land. He was Ivri, Hebrew, Passover. He came over, crossed over the other side. So yeah, so there's allusions to this and understanding. It's all quite amazing. But another one is, and we love the pictures and the insights that we see. I see some of you are joining us. I see Shirley has joined us. Anyway, so welcome, Shabbat Shalom. So last year when we talked about it, and we talked about how, in Genesis 22, it talks about how he and the lad go up, but then when they go to leave and come back, Isaac is absent. And this is a picture, this is an allusion to the Messiah, because we're comparing Isaac, the only begotten son, to the Messiah, who is our atonement. And Isaac is viewed by the sages as an atonement. And so you had that correlation going there. And so what happens is Isaac disappears for a few years and comes back, and we don't see him again until he takes a bride. So you have the Messiah who lives 3.5 years on this earth. Then he's gone away and he'll be coming back for a bride. So you can see how those correlate with each other. We talked about that last year. And so one of the things is they talk about the sages say that is that Isaac went to school with Shem to learn more. Another thing is that he was actually brought up to heaven. Okay, I kid you not. Okay, people can say, "Oh, I don't believe those kind of things." Wait a second. Okay, we believe about the Red Sea. We believe all these different kind of things, the miraculous things that happen. But you're not going to believe an illusion that actually points to the Messiah, where it says the sages in these books like this. I'm telling you, they say things like that. They say that he went to heaven to learn directly from God. Okay, make this stuff up. Isn't this? It's crazy, all right. But you know what it does? It strengthens my faith in the Messiah. It strengthens it strengthens it, and I love it. It's just powerful. Now, remember, this is about Sarah's life and the life of Sarah, and again, it's about her death and Abraham's death. But no other place in the Bible, going back to Genesis 23 here, where we started, no other place in the Bible is a woman's age mentioned. And still to this day, women don't mention their age. And the rabbis talk about how Sarah lived on a higher level. This is one of the reasons why her age was mentioned. She lived on a higher level. She had a life of value. As a matter of fact, they say that the 37 years of Isaac, and the reason we understand this is that because if you do the math in the Torah, you'll figure out that Isaac was actually 37 years old in Genesis 22 when he went with his father. That's why he was considered a willing sacrifice. When we look, you read the King James and he says, he and the lad, people automatically assume that it must be a young child. No, he was 37 years old. And like I said, when you study the Torah out, you can do the math, you can figure this out. So, but those 37 years that she had of Isaac were some of the best years of her life. They were of the highest of everything. And it was another thing that's interesting is that Sarah was also considered to be very beautiful. Well, and we kind of see allusions to this in the Torah because of the things that she went through, and where Abraham said, say your sister, not my wife, to protect himself. And because she was very beautiful, even at an elder age of 90 years old. Now, you have to understand this. So, like, jumping again to chapter 24 and verse number 1. Now, Abraham was old, well on in years. The rabbis say that he all of a sudden, after her death, he felt old. And I can understand this. I can understand that. I don't. But in 103b, it says, before him, old age did not exist. Interesting. So you had Sarah, who was very beautiful. As a matter of fact, they said that she basically looked like she was 25. Why? Because now here we look at Sanhedrin 103b and we have discussions about basically how they were all talking. And they said that before him, speaking of Abraham, old age did not exist. So it wasn't until after this time that people actually started to age. And why did this happen? Why did this happen? What's going on with this? You read in the Bible about someone who has a hoary head, You can see I'm getting a little bit of gray in my beard. All right. I'm not quite there. I'm not quite that super elder. Need some more humility too, obviously. But in Daniel 7 and 9, he describes God as someone who is what has his head was white, as pure like pure wool. All right, so God had this distinction. The Tankuma talks about it being about splendor and majesty, and so it goes on to talk about how God graced man with this sign. Like I said, it's not quite there yet, but it does show that I've been around 55 years. Uh, that's another thing. Just a side note, and I've just got to talk about this because it's just itching me to talk about it because it just came into my mind. It must be a reason for it. But I look at this, you look at the beard, and some people frown upon beards. And if I were to shave mine off right now and keep my head covered, which I do, I mean, my head's covered almost all the time. And so if I were to shave this off, I probably would look quite a bit younger. And isn't that something that people seem to really get from the world today? And I realize I'm running out of time. They get from the world today is that, oh, you have to look young. Look, and you're constantly being bombarded by this. And I'll tell you where this comes from. It comes from Greek thinking. It doesn't come from Hebrew thinking. Remember, here I'm giving you the Hebrew perspective today. So the Greeks, so what I was saying was that, we're talking about the beard, so to speak, and it says, it continues to say, which he bears himself, so that one will know who deserves to be honored. Okay, so now, but the Greeks, like I was just saying, they put the emphasis on adolescence, and they put that at the center of life. It's all about valuing beauty and youth and physical strength. But the Bible points to respect for family and for tradition, what we've been talking about here. And many people get they get upset with me when I'm talking to some people, and I'm telling them that, even Paul taught traditions, and he used a Greek word, paradosis. He was teaching them traditions like how to observe the Sabbath, how to light the candles, how to eat properly. Okay, and he was saying, don't let people judge you because you're starting to follow God's laws. And let me tell you something. Following God's laws, you will notice the increase in blessing. There, I said it. Why? Because it's in Deuteronomy chapter 28. We learned about it not too long ago. If you obey my commands, right? It's all that if. So the Greeks, they loved beauty and youth and physical strength, but the Bible talks about family and tradition. When my late father-in-law was alive, we gathered around him. He had the white head. He had the wisdom. We went to him for understanding and knowledge to help us to understand things in the Bible. That's where the emphasis is. And so when we go back here to Genesis 25 and verse number 8, and it says that he blessed him with everything. Those words in the Hebrew, with everything, has a numerical value of 52. What's so important about 52? Because it's equal to the word ben. And ben is the Hebrew word for son, 52. So when he was given a son, that was everything for him. Everything. Think about that. All the bad things that happened, all those, he had his son. Think about that now. What do we have? We have the Messiah. We have the Son. And this parasha, we've run out of time, but it continues to go on, and I could have spent a lot of time just on the very next part. Now, we talked about a little bit last year about finding a bride for Messiah, and that's Eleazar is tasked to that. And I mentioned that last year. Every day, my wife and I, we still pray this every morning. We pray the same prayer that Eleazar prayed. Lord, make us successful today. Successful in what? Successful in finding someone for Messiah, bringing someone into being a bride for Messiah. And I understand, as a man, we have a lot of trouble with this whole we are the bride of Messiah. It's easier for women, of course. But for men, we want to do manly things with other men, so it's a little bit harder for us. But when we understand that, and I just wanted to throw a couple more little insights out here. You ever notice that so much of marriage and betrothal and talks of marriage have to do around a well? The Messiah talks to a woman. Yeah, you're about marriage, and then also here you have Rebecca at the well. There's many things throughout the Bible that happen around a well. And what's in a well? Water. And what is water alluded to? To Torah. Torah. Yes. And so let me give you just one last thing. It's interesting. One of the Midrash talks about that when Rebecca went to get the water for Eleazar to give him water, because he asked for God, the woman that does this and does for the camels, let it be her, And so it says that when one of the Midrash, one of the legends is that when she went in to get the water, it wasn't way down in there. It rose up to meet her. Now think about that. When you take that step toward Torah, when you take that step toward God, it will rise up to meet you. It will rise up to meet you. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that amazing? I just love it. I just love it. There is one more thing I have to leave you with. And jumping back again to chapter 25, in the beginning of it, when you look at the Hebrew, and excuse me while I'm just looking something up here. And so, okay, so back, excuse me, sorry, I got distracted for a second there, but I was just trying to make sure we get something in line here, but because I wanted to share this last thing. And I realize we've gone way over on time, but so in the Hebrew, it says, Abraham proceeded and took a wife whose name was Keturah. In the Hebrew, Keturah means like beautiful spices, beautiful fragrance is what that means. And the rabbis will tell you that it was actually Hagar. And I talked about this last night with Rabbi Libby. Most of them believe that it was Hagar, that he went back and then through basically kind of a reconciliation brought her back in. And not out of guilt or anything like that, but out of, but anyway, but the point is that when I look in the Hebrew here, that first word in the first couple of words, it says, Vayosef Avraham. Okay. Did that first word that I mentioned, Hebrew, does that sound kind of familiar? Vayosef. What's the Hebrew word Yosef? It's Joseph. an illusion, one of these deep levels, and the sages talk about it. It's a deep level to a picture of the suffering Messiah. So here in this end part of Abraham's life, him taking a new wife, just goes to show you that man is not supposed to be alone. Okay. Um, he's taking her, and he's still, and then it says that he brought her into the faith, so to speak. So even at an advanced age, he's still following what God wants him to do. He's still bringing people to the one true God, bringing people into the family of God. And that's what we're trying to do here, folks. That's what we're trying to do. Vayosef. Here's an allusion to the suffering Messiah. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Lord, lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom, give you peace. Shabbat shalom. Thank you so much for joining today.